All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CIF seminar today. I'm Jan Tobias Mühlberg, and I'm going to be the session chair of today's seminar. I'm very excited to have Victor here, who actually has a coffee because it's about 6:30 in New York, where he is right now. He is a researcher with Distrinet, and he's going to present an audit of Facebook's political ad policy enforcement today. I think I'm just going to give Victor the floor. Only thing I want to mention is if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll try to moderate this, or afterwards, after Victor's talk, you can just open your mics and your camera and maybe we can have a bit of a discussion of what is being presented. The talk is probably going to be about 45 minutes and then we have a Q&A which lasts as long as it lasts. It's usually as it is with these seminars, and I'm super happy to have you here. The seminar list for next year on the website is still fairly empty. So if you guys have interesting ideas for presentations that you want to give, or you know people who would fit very well in this little interdisciplinary seminar series, then please mention them to me, or send me an email, or let me know that you want to give a talk or whatever. I'm really looking forward to Victor's talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So hi everybody, I'm Victor, and today I will be presenting our study that also got accepted at Usenix Security 2022, which we did together with colleagues from New York University, specifically the Cybersecurity for Democracy project. And those are Laura, Tom, Wouter, Damon, and Tobias. So indeed, our study is about online advertising. Everybody comes into contact with online advertising almost every day. And there's a specific subset that specifically looks at political advertising, especially in the context of elections. People will see more and more political advertising, and political parties have discovered the power that's in online political advertising. These are a few examples from Belgian parties. Belgian parties are very good at spending money on Facebook to show people advertising. And again, it can be powerful. It can enable more engagement in the political process. It can allow smaller parties to reach more people. But with this also comes some sort of risk of abuse. And of course, given the fact that political advertiser influences the democratic process, this abuse can be very harmful to society. A few examples of the types of abuse that can be propagated through online political advertising are disinformation, so spreading false messages through this kind of advertising, like the example on the right related to the pandemic. In countries where voting isn't mandatory, voter suppression is a genuine issue. So people trying to dissuade people from participating in elections and actually going to the polls, which usually can give an advantage to one party or another. You have issues around inauthentic behavior, that's representing oneself with a false identity or a hidden identity, which might enable a certain message to get across more easily. If you don't really know, if the user doesn't really know where the message comes from, or publishing the same message through multiple accounts, again with different identities, without it being obvious that actually this is like a coordinated campaign. And finally, what also triggered, let's say, the whole process of increased public awareness and public scrutiny on these online political ads is the fear of interference from foreign actors. And their concrete examples are the 2016 US elections, where Russian state actors were observed to use online political advertising to influence people to propagate messages. In Europe, also with Brexit, the same behavior was seen. So this also triggered, let's say, legislators and again, more the general public to be more aware of the risks that exist in online political advertising. Now, in terms of legislation, there isn't really that much legislation, and it's certainly not really up to date. Legislation always has to catch up to new trends, to new technologies, and here it's the same. Existing legislation is really geared towards mass media like TV and radio, or it only exists at certain levels. In the US, you have more stricter legislation at the federal level. In Europe, it's more like diversified across the different countries, different nations. And because there is not really legislation, And because this public scrutiny increased, the large advertising platforms took it upon themselves to implement solutions, implement oversight on online political advertising. So platforms like Google, Twitter, and what we'll be studying, Facebook, developed their own policies and also, of course, enforced them to combat abusive political ads on these platforms. Now, what you do see is that because these interventions are voluntary and these interventions are designed by each platform on their own, is that they all decide themselves what they consider in scope of the policy, what is political, what is not political, and that these policies can therefore differ widely. Google only considers like ads from political actors close to elections as political. Twitter doesn't even allow political ads at all anymore. Facebook is somewhat the most broad in its policies, the largest coverage of topics that are considered in scope of the policies. And I'll now go into the specific policies that Facebook implements because those are of course necessary to know for our study as well. So what are Facebook's policies based on? The core definition and the core setting is that Facebook regulates all issues about, in their terms, social issues, elections, and politics. There's this whole subdivision of the definition, but basically it means that ads by or about politicians and political parties are in scope, about elections, including campaigns for going out and voting. And finally, there's social issues, which are societal topics that are important to the public debate, where there is still room for advocacy, and where influencing the public opinion can ultimately also have an effect on elections and on who people will tend to vote for. Now, these social issues actually vary by country. Some countries don't have the notion of social issues in the context of Facebook's policies. There only ads about elections and politics are regulated, and otherwise the list of issues also differs by country. Usually worldwide, and specifically also in the European Union, things like the economy, like the environment, like immigration are all considered social issues. But in the US, you also that also includes education or gun control. So depending on the country, you might also have different topics that are considered up for debate and that are considered social issues, and where the ads have to be declared to Facebook. Now, this is the only definition. You have other pages and resources that clarify these definitions. So here, more specifically, it will talk about when ads about elections or politics are in scope, again, when they mention politicians, etc. It also clarifies for social issues that the ads have to include discussion, debate, or advocacy related to these social issues. So purely mentioning a social issue doesn't necessarily mean that the ad is political and that it should be declared as such. And then actually recently, even after the publication of our paper, Facebook changed its policy, specifically related again to these social issue ads, because these do seem to be the ads with the most contention. And here they state that if the primary purpose of an ad is commercial, then actually it no longer falls under the policy. So it used to be a political ad, but now it isn't anymore. And it does not again require all the restrictions on the political ads. To summarize the three previous slides, Facebook's political ad policies may be somewhat confusing. They're spread out across many resources, a lot of help pages, obscure help pages, which clarify all of these definitions. These policies change over time. That's of course not entirely a bad thing, but if you're not up to date with the latest policy, you might be violating it just because you're not aware of the latest version. And what is kind of a telling thing is that it does require a lot of examples that clarify how to interpret these policies. So it does indicate that this policy is really not straightforward. And the effect that this has is that advertisers might find it hard to comply with policies. Again, they might just have missed the certain page where their specific topic is being covered. Facebook might also find it hard to enforce these policies, again, because they're up to so much interpretation. If one reviewer looks at the policy and another, maybe they come up with a different decision. So consistent and proper enforcement may be difficult for them as well. And for outside scrutiny, like ours, it's also hard to audit these policies, again, because we also do not have the definitive interpretation that Facebook gives to these policies. So we can only somewhat estimate or with a certain confidence indicate whether we think that an ad is political and then expand that to the whole ad ecosystem. Now, why is there this definition? Why is there this whole idea of a political ad? Well, Facebook then applies special rules to these ads. First and foremost, the ad has to be declared as in the scope of this policy by the advertiser. So whenever an advertiser publishes an ad, they get a little checkbox, and if they tick that, then they indicate, okay, this ad is political in nature, and that triggers a whole set of other restrictions and rules. Specifically, they have to confirm their identity. So they have to confirm who they are. They have to send in an identity card or proof of their company, together with proof of their location. This is called the authorization process, and this is meant to make sure that people aren't like using fake identities to propagate ads, and specifically for the location, also that Facebook requires that if you publish an ad in a certain country, you must have a presence in that country, again, to combat some of this foreign interference. For each ad, the advertiser also has to declare who paid for the ad, which is called the disclaimer. And this is shown next to the ad and will again indicate who's behind the money for this ad. This can vary also between advertisers or within an advertiser. An advertiser might have multiple sources of funding for publishing political ads. And finally, there's additional transparency for political ads. These will be archived for 7 years in what's called Facebook's ad library. And you get some additional data fields. You get the number of impressions, so how often was the ad seen. You get the spend, so how much was spent on the ad, and you get certain demographic distribution of who saw the ad in the end. Of course, with having a policy, you also need to enforce that policy. And what specifically this enforcement is meant to do is catch those ads which haven't been declared by the political advertiser, but that are still considered as in scope of this policy and are considered as political. Facebook states themselves that this process is largely automated. Sometimes our ads are passed on to human review, but in their own words, they mostly use artificial intelligence to try and catch these ads. Why is this catching of ads important? Well, then the ad gets disabled, so it gets taken down. It will no longer be shown to any users. It will be retroactively labeled as a political ad, and the ad will be publicly archived, and that additional data will be made available. However, because this is a retroactive action, certain other requirements will not be fulfilled. So you will not have this authorization process. You will not have a disclaimer. So still, you will not know who paid the ad, who was behind the ad, and that might in itself be sufficient even for the advertiser if they really want to go to the malicious route. Why is this good enforcement important? Well, this basically goes back to classic concepts in security. On the one hand, you want to maintain the integrity of your platform, which in this case concretely means that you do not want to have malicious political ads slip through the cracks. In tech speak, these are the false negatives. Because these political ads, they would avoid scrutiny and accountability. People will be unaware that the ad is political. And this might also give some sort of an incentive for spreading harmful content, because you can stay somewhat anonymous, because people will not be aware that you're actually trying to influence them. So maybe, again, the message might arrive differently for the user. And of course, you will evade the restrictions that I just talked about. So you will not have to identify yourself. Your ad will not be really transparent. It will not be archived. And you might even circumvent certain bans on political ads. Like I said, Twitter has like a blanket ban on ads. Facebook implemented the temporary ban in the US after the 2020 elections. I said temporary, it still lasted for 6 months. But if these bans exist, maybe even honest advertisers will stop publishing ads, but malicious advertisers could actually continue placing political ads just by going around these policies. On the other hand, you also want to maintain availability. That's actually also a core security concept. You want to make sure that the system remains available. And in this case, this means that you do not want to incorrectly detect benign ads. In this case, that's the false positives. And why is that? Well, these ads are, like I said, taken offline. If Facebook detects these ads, they will take them offline. In the case of commercial advertisers, that's most economic harm. They will not reach their consumers. But you might also have certain social messages that actually are beneficial for the general public, related, for example, to health, or in this case, lately the pandemic. These kinds of messages will also not reach the public. So again, this public cannot be informed about these issues. And more broadly, more abstractly, on a higher level, any false detections really erode trust in the enforcement. If they have to make so many errors in detection of ads by detecting so many more ads than is necessary to be able to maybe catch those few ads that should have been caught, that also does not really bode well for this specific system and for actually Facebook systems as a whole. That they're well built, that they're really performed, that they can really complete this task of enforcing those policies well. And to be able to then, of course, hold Facebook accountable and evaluate whether these concepts are upheld, our study then looked into auditing whether Facebook's enforcement works properly. We are the first large-scale audit to be able to do this. There have been previous studies which looked at much smaller sample sizes, but of course, ideally you would want to be able to study Facebook systems over a long time with nearly complete coverage to really understand in depth how well this enforcement process works. Like I said, we had a large-scale an audit, and for that, of course, you need data, and we actually needed more data than Facebook makes readily available. Facebook really emphasizes transparency for holding them accountable and for holding advertisers accountable, and for this, they provide one major tool, which is called the ad library. So this is this archive or repository of ads, which breaks down into three subtools. You have on the one hand the API, which Facebook puts out there as the main tool that researchers like us should use to study the platform at scale, to collect data in bulk, to retrieve data in bulk. And this is an archive of all political ads. Political in the sense that Facebook knows that they're political, either because they have been correctly declared by the advertiser or because they have been called by Facebook. However, this tool is insufficient for our purposes. We wanted to also look at the ads that Facebook didn't catch, and ads will not appear in the API while they are not yet caught. So if they are caught later on, there's still a period of time where they will not be available in the API because Facebook at that time does not know that they are political. And if they are never caught, they will never appear in this API. So the set of ads that Facebook misses completely will never show up in this API. And that's why we went to the web portal, which is a different, it's a variant of the ad library. And there, all currently active ads are listed for all pages. Whether the ad is political or not, you will always be able to see all the ads that a certain page is running at this time. The disadvantage is that then ads disappear once they are inactive. And again, you go back to this thing of if an ad is temporary online and goes offline and it was never called by Facebook in the process, then it will disappear also from this web portal and we will no longer have access to that data. So we built our own tool to archive the active ads. We collected them regularly, we stored them such that we could analyze them later on. Finally, there's also the ad library report. This report contains aggregate statistics on political advertisers. It's basically a big spreadsheet which lists all the different advertisers, how many ads they ran, how much they spent. And this was for us the source of the pages that were in scope of the study. So we looked specifically at those advertisers where we knew that they had ever published a political ads. It's completely infeasible to collect this data really for all advertisers, specifically with the tools that are currently available to us. We do not have a complete list of all advertisers on Facebook. And even if we had, there are many more advertisers on Facebook who never come near a political ad. So it would somewhat be a waste of resources to collect their ads as well. So with this data collection tool that we built. We started from the 215,000 pages from the report that had at least one political ad since April 2020. And then for these pages, we retrieved their active ads through the web portal every 24 hours, which it's a trade-off between having sufficient coverage and having and the limited resources that we have. And we retrieved a one-time snapshot after 14 days. And this snapshot could tell us, even if an ad was inactive, whether it was detected by Facebook or not. From this process, we collected over 33 million ads. 4.1 million ads were declared as political by their advertisers. They did what they had to do. They fully complied with the policy. Of course, Facebook also then does not have to do anything for those ads. It's not like their enforcement system has to get into action. The ad has been declared. There's nothing to decide there. There are 29.5 million ads that were not deemed political in our data set, because not all pages in the report will continuously publish political ads. And the subset of ads that we then looked into more specifically was the 189,000 ads that were not declared by the advertisers, yet either Facebook or we determined that they were political in the end. And those are the ones where indeed Facebook's enforcement system kicks into action or should kick into action, and where a decision has to be made on whether the ad should be considered in scope of the political ad policy or not. To give a little bit more context on our data set, for all the political ads we collected, those amounted to 100 billion impressions, so people saw them 100 billion times. Advertisers spent more than $1 billion on them, mostly in the US and then Brazil, because they just had elections during the period of our measurement. And we also evaluated the extent of our coverage because of a signal in the data which indicated how much data we should expect. And from that, we derived that we missed around 20% of ads. So we did have good coverage. We had more than 80% coverage. But still, it shows that this approach is still somewhat limited, and it would be ideal if we could have broader and more reliable access to the data that Facebook has. So with this data set, we could continue with the analysis and with the results. I'll start just showing you the slides. These are basically the main results that we have. These are the numbers of ads, and I'll go into the different parts, the different errors that Facebook could make based on the determination, on the one hand by Facebook of whether the ad was political, and on the other hand by us of whether the ad was political or not. And I'll start off by discussing the positives, the true positives, but also to some extent the false positives, because we started by looking at those ads where Facebook's detection kicked into action. So those ads that were not correctly declared by their advertiser as political, but that Facebook afterwards then detected, retroactively labeled, took down, and put in the archive. We observed this kind of enforcement for over 72,000 ads, which was still only 1.7% of the political ads that we saw in our data set, across 13,900 pages, 5%. This is an improvement compared to 2 years ago. A study done actually by one of the co-authors a few years ago saw that 10% of ads were not correctly declared, and that actually 68% of pages had at least one ad that was incorrectly declared. So advertisers seem to comply better with the policy. One thing to note here is that, of course, these ads were the ones that bypassed Facebook's initial ad review. So also at the time of submission of an ad, Facebook might indicate to the advertiser, hey, this is a political ad, you should be declaring it. We do not have insight into that process. We do not have insight into how well it works. We can only go on to see the ads that made it through this review. So Facebook allowed them to be published initially, and only afterwards, Facebook's process for Facebook's enforcement system found these ads and took them down. What this also implies is, of course, that this ad has had some exposure. It was allowed to be published, and people have seen it. Usually, this exposure is quite short. 40% of ads were detected in less than 1 day. Bear in mind that the average ad runs only for 1 or 2 days, but still, not all of these ads gain a lot of exposure. Still, we found through this observation, but also data from the API, that in total there were 55,000 ads that were either active for over a week, or that were very likely only caught and detected by Facebook after they had already become inactive. And this implies that the ad was respectively active for a very long time, again, over a week, where people could see the ad, or it was online for the intended duration. The advertiser configured the ad has to be active for this time frame. The time frame was completed, and only afterwards did Facebook's systems take down the ad. So it meant that users were still exposed to this infringing content. We calculated that this was over 2 billion impressions, so over 2 billion times people saw the ad. And for these ads, there's of course no real benefit of the enforcement. People still see the ad. That's the main goal of the enforcement, preventing people from seeing violating content. You only have like secondary benefits. Facebook could take additional action on these advertisers because they violated policy. We can see the ads because they appeared in the transparency reports and in the API. But for users are not protected for these ads. Users will still see these ads. So any failures here with this initial ad review still allow people to be exposed to this violating content. This analysis looks specifically at the ads. We also looked at the behavior of the pages. If a page has an ad that is detected by Facebook, so if Facebook indicates to them, hey, we saw an ad that should have been declared, that is in scope of our policy, but you didn't go through the steps to actually properly declare it. If ads are being detected, does that then lead to either better policy adherence by these pages? So do these pages then start complying with the policy? And or does Facebook start implementing additional enforcement? If pages violate frequently, does that lead to, for example, taking down the page or preventing them from publishing ads? For that, I made a very nice and complex graph. It basically shows the percentage of ads that have been properly declared by the advertiser over time. And we can see a number of groups here, a number of different behaviors that pages show. The first two groups are advertisers where the detection was effective at making them comply with the policy. So they didn't declare the ads, they had ads that were detected, and then they started complying. So it becomes a darker shade. Say that they increase the number of ads that they start declaring. So for those ads, detection is actually effective. It means that they realize that they should comply with the policy and they start complying. The third and the fourth group are similar, but there this improvement is only temporary. So they start declaring more and more ads, and then this reduces again to not declaring political ads anymore. However, the fifth and the sixth group, those are advertisers who could not be bothered. So they had ads being detected, but they just continued running ads without declaring them. So for them, this detection was not really effective, was not really a trigger for them to start complying with the policy. And maybe Facebook, for these pages, Facebook should start taking additional action to prevent these pages from running ads. But as you can see, these pages still continued ads for running ads for a long time. So it does not seem that Facebook implemented these kind of additional actions. And then finally, a very interesting group are advertisers who were declaring ads as political before the US election. And then this ban that I talked about, so this block of not allowing political ads to be run on the platform anymore was implemented. And normally then these advertisers, you would expect that they would stop running political ads because previously they had run only political ads. So their political intention is quite clear. But actually they continued running ads, but indeed just without declaring them because they could not declare them because Facebook would not allow any political ads, correctly declare political ads to run on the platform. And of course, these are advertisers who are clearly in violation of Facebook's policies. And especially in violation of this ban. As I said, rule-abiding advertisers will continue running ads, will not continue running ads, will not have their message out there, while these like malicious advertisers can just continue publishing their political message and actually will not have any like counter opinion by those rule-abiding advertisers, again, because they're not allowed to run ads anymore. Focusing then specifically on the group of the false positives. So those are the ads that were detected by Facebook as political again, but that we specifically consider to not be political in nature, according to Facebook's own definition. Just to make sure that to clarify, in this study, we just looked at Facebook's definition of political ads. Previous research has shown that this definition, that people can have very different definitions and different opinions of what should be considered a political ad. But to be able to understand how well Facebook's own system works, we have to work with whatever Facebook inputs in that system as the definition that it should enforce. So what we did to be able to detect those ads that were actually not political, even though they were detected, is a manual annotation of 600 ads in the US, specifically US, to make sure that all the annotators understood the context and could understand the ad. We also saw good agreement between the annotators, so we think that we can have reliable conclusions about this ads and propagate those conclusions to the other detected ads. What came out of this annotation is that among the ads that have been detected by Facebook, 55% of them should not have been detected. So again, these are the false positives, and this is a very, very high false positive rate. So basically for every ad that is correctly detected, there is one other ad that is incorrectly detected that is actually not political in nature, but still Facebook's detection caught the ad. So when we extrapolate this to all the ads that were detected by Facebook, over 40,000 of them were over detected, so should have not have been detected, but were still by Facebook. So this suggests that the detection is very aggressive. The themes that we saw in these ads were primarily even commercial. So it was very unclear of why Facebook would take down this ad. There was no obvious thing that might confuse them, or where maybe the policy was somewhat ambiguous and that might trigger detection. We did see also a number of ads related to the pandemic and to health. There you could somewhat understand that if the ad might be considered to relate to social issues, although even in our opinion, it actually wasn't like a social issue because it didn't do this advocacy for a certain opinion related to the social issue. For context, among those ads that were properly declared by the political advertiser, we only considered 3.3% of them to not that those ads should not have been declared. So if an ad is properly declared by the advertiser, it is very likely that it's actually a political ad. Some examples of ads that were incorrectly flagged by Facebook. You have some ads related to the pandemic, but like I said, also like car sales ads, ads for pie recipes. So really things where it was really unclear to us why this ad was detected in the first place. As a side note, the annotators also disagreed on quite a number of ads, 5% of the correctly declared ones and 3% of the detected ones, which indicates that these policies are again quite ambiguous. And even expert annotators like us have a difficulty of consistently interpreting these policies. And that suggests that advertisers might have difficulty in interpreting and complying with these policies, and that Facebook might also have difficulty with enforcing these policies. Then I'll discuss the ads that were not detected by Facebook as political. So they were let through. They could run on the platform as is without any restrictions, but that we actually considered to be political. They're also called the false negatives. So the undeclared ads that should be were not detected. And for this, we took a rather conservative approach. So we classified pages using very clear signals. We did not rely on some sort of automated model. Instead, we took externally curated lists of known political actors, and we also looked at the category that a page declares itself to be. Every Facebook page has a category, and we specifically selected those pages in the categories of like politician, political organization, political party, etc. And the reason why we do this is after this classification, we select those pages that are from obvious political actors, and we expect all of their ads to have been declared or detected by Facebook. Again, under Facebook's own definition. The first part of Facebook's definition states that any ad by a political actor must be declared. This also indicates or implies that, for example, if a politician has a restaurant and they publish an advertisement for that restaurant using their private account or their politician account, that will still, under the definition of Facebook and in our analysis, be considered a political ad just because of the stipulation that an ad by a political actor, whatever the content, is political. Again, up for debate whether that should actually be considered a political ad, but again, we follow Facebook's definition in this analysis. Looking at the ads from these political actors and searching those that actually were not correctly declared and were also not detected, we found over 116,000 ads where this was the case. And when you compare this to actually the undeclared ads that were detected by Facebook, there were only 6,000 of those. So only 5% of the ads by obvious political actors that those actors did not properly declare were detected in the end. So this does suggest that Facebook is also really not good at the task of finding ads from obvious political actors that were not properly declared. Again, even though maybe the number of ads might seem small, even though it's more than 100,000, what matters is how often users are exposed to this content. And again, we see over 2 billion impressions of these ads, over 2 billion times when users saw the ads without a proper context, without knowing that the ad was political, being exposed to ads that were trying to influence them without any awareness from the user. Translated in spend, we estimate this to be up to $20 million. And in fact, for these ads, there's a complete lack of transparency and a complete lack of a possibility of scrutiny. Again, because these ads were not declared and because Facebook does not know that they are political, they disappear from the ad library after they become inactive. As we would say, we basically have the most complete archive of political ads at this moment, just because we also have these ads which were not properly declared by advertisers and which were not detected. What's also true is that we will never have access to those additional data fields. So actually the impressions and dollars spent amounts are estimates based on the other ads that the page ran, just because given the fact that the ad is not known as political, we do not have this extra metadata on how many was spent on these ads and how often these ads were seen. And again, to give some examples, these are major Belgian political parties, major American political actors, and things like voting, very clear messaging that relates to elections and politics, but which was not caught by Facebook. We then divided our results based on the type of actor and also the country from which the actor came. And here we see like differing behavior. For very big US political advertisers, so at the federal level or at the state level, performance is actually very good. Facebook only missed 0.17% of the ads from those actors. When we expanded to all advertisers in the US, also local advertisers, performance worsens to almost 1%. When we look at the other big election during our time frame, which was the Brazilian election, again, it worsens to 1.5%. And when we expand to all political advertisers worldwide in the end, we will find that 4.5% of the ads from these political actors were missed. 1 in 6 pages were actually allowed to run an ad that was not properly declared, that was never detected, but it was actually political in nature. How do you come to this like bigger figure when you look at the whole world? That's because this performance is unevenly distributed worldwide. Again, in countries like the US, you have fewer than 1% of ads that are missed, but in countries like Malaysia, North Macedonia, Argentina, Turkey, Portugal, France, up to 45% of ads have not been properly detected. And this suggests that diversity in languages and cultures and political contexts across all of these different countries is very hard for Facebook to capture in their review models. Other confounding factors might exist, but also, for example, the Facebook papers do suggest that Facebook hardly invests in its systems outside the US and that these systems are therefore not adapted to these different contexts, this different data that they're getting, and are really not able to similarly capture political ads in those other countries as well. So those are the different subsets of our data that we analyzed. When we summarize this in nice classification metrics, precision recall, F1 score, for context, these numbers range from 0 to 1, and 1 is the performance that you would want, and that would the best performance. So these all are less than half, less than 0.5. So these classification metrics are really do not suggest a performance system. In our outreach, we translated this as well to 83% of the ads that were not properly labeled by Facebook. Of all of those ads where we or Facebook considered them as political. So it does suggest that Facebook's systems really do not perform well. Moreover, these are all lower bounds. We were conservative in our definition of the false negatives. There is a certain set of false positives where we even disagreed upon whether they had to be declared. Other research also confirms some of these numbers in terms of the high false positive rate, false negative rate for clearly political ads. But actually that research also confirms that or suggests that for ads where that are not as clearly political, for example, these kind of social issue ads, the false negative rate might be even much higher, up to 25% instead of the 5% that we saw. So again, it seems that Facebook systems are not really performing well. Now, why might this be? We try to identify a number of limitations in Facebook's approach. The approach specifically, so again, their reliance on automated solutions, which appear to not learn the obvious signal of political intent. So again, this is an automated system, artificial intelligence, but it seems that the advertiser is not really taken into account. So the system only looks at the ad level, but misses clear signals from the advertiser that they are a political actor. So we do suggest that Facebook implements simple, clearly enforceable rules that really complement this automated reviews. Also, in terms of the consequences towards advertisers, if pages run violating ads frequently, they should be prevented from doing so in the future. But again, we saw in our analysis that pages that do not react to ad detection actually can continue running political ads, even while political ads are banned on the platform. So again, it does not seem that there are many consequences put on these advertisers. In terms of consistency, the performance has to be better globally and has to be fairer globally. Like in all countries, users should be prevented from seeing this kind of violating content. But this does require investment. This does require adapting policies to the local context, adapting the review process, engaging with local actors like governments and institutions to understand the context and to apply it to their models. But that does require some work, that does require some effort. And finally, those policies should also be simplified, clarified. There are certain ambiguities in there that make it harder for advertisers to comply, that make it harder for Facebook to enforce it as well. Very much also on these issue ads, but also even like just the political ads, it should be very clear and very straightforward for advertisers whether the ads is in scope of this policy and whether they have to then declare it as political or not. And finally, this enforcement, this bad enforcement also has implications on the transparency. As I said, Facebook does really emphasize transparency as the main way for the public and for users to hold advertisers and Facebook accountable. But if enforcement is not working well, then you end up with bad transparency. Why is this? Well, there are many ads in there that shouldn't be there. These are, again, the false positives, so the ads that were detected but actually were not political in nature. And then you have this other set of ads that are not in this included in this transparency data that should be there. So the false negatives, the ads that were missed by Facebook that were not declared but should have been detected. So that's why we really advocate, especially my colleague Laura, advocates for increased transparency for all ads. So all ads should be archived, so should be available for a longer time than just while they were active. And all ads should have all the metadata in terms of also the impressions and the spend, just because we cannot really trust Facebook to make the decision on what is political. So we really need access to all the other ads as well, so that we can hold the advertisers and Facebook accountable in terms of those ads that were not properly declared, were not detected, but that are actually political. Facebook has also indicated that they're not really interested in implementing these improvements. So we do see room for actors beyond Facebook to start intervening, legislators, regulators. We also welcome the proposals from the European Union related to the DSA and the separate regulation on political ads to really increase transparency and require platforms to enforce their policies well. And this entails a shift from self-regulation to co-regulation. So right now, these platforms self-regulate, they implement their own oversight, their own policies, but this does require enforcement. And we do see in our audit that this enforcement does not really work well. So we do need other people to intervene to make sure to force these people, to force these platforms to enforce their policies well, and to provide transparency also to all to be able to audit this. So again, to conclude, the enforcement is currently unfortunately flawed. Facebook misses as many ads as they detect, which harms the integrity of the platform. There are many violating ads that can continue running on these platforms, even though they are clearly in scope of Facebook's policies. While also over half of the detected ads were wrongly flagged, so the availability is harmed. A lot of advertisers see their ads being taken down, even though they shouldn't be. And this does have real consequences. So users are exposed in large numbers to violating ads. Bans on political ads are being evaded, are being circumvented. So these bans also do not become effective anymore, just because of this lack of enforcement, because of this bad enforcement implementation. We have a number of reasons why we think this enforcement is flawed, a number of limitations in Facebook approach. As I said, Facebook does not really seem interested. They focus on transparency, but again, this transparency is incomplete and inaccurate as a result of this bad enforcement. And we do believe that transparency is certainly a primary solution and a primary step in making sure that enforcement improves. Because if you have better transparency, then people like us have the data required to hold both the platforms and the advertisers accountable. And this accountability gives an incentive for platforms to enforce better, also to advertisers to comply better. And if you have better enforcement and better compliance, then you can ensure the better security of the ecosystem and of the democratic process as a whole. And that really will make sure that those benefits that online political advertising brings in terms of increasing the reach and increasing engagement do outweigh the risks and the vulnerabilities that exist by having this kind of platform that everybody can access and where you can reach a lot of people. And only by having these benefits outweigh the risks can we make sure that online political speech stays secure in the future and that we can continue reaping its benefits. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I want to thank you very much for listening, and I really look forward to the discussion that we'll be having right now.